makes us feel right. I'm just getting off the train.
Hello. Hello.
Good
I'm trying to
morning.
get back on. Okay,
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Soul Purpose Show. Thank you so much for joining us. You see us here every Saturday, live on YouTube, Facebook Live, and of course, we are seen and heard all over the world on In Touch News, Internet Radio.
So you keep saying that. I believe that we heard all over the world, but do you have any evidence to support that we're heard all over the
They will
world?
tell you.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm sorry. I just
there's
had
people
to.
overseas. But look, man, we big time.
I'm not saying that we're not suggesting that we're not, but you say that every time.
Yeah.
I just want to ensure that we really are heard all over the world, because otherwise you're lying.
Well, we're on the internet.
You're right. You're correct. Okay, my bad. Go ahead.
I'm your host, Keith. This is my lovely and talented and sometimes overly opinionated, lovely co-host, Monica, and myself. We have a special edition of the Soul Purpose Show today, and I know I've been teasing it for the last few weeks. But before we jump into today's subject, we're not going to talk too long. I want to thank all of you who joined us last month for the month of March. If you did not know, March is Women's History Month. And so the reason why you haven't seen me is my wife did not allow me to come on last month. Why don't you recap for our viewers what happened?
So I'd like to correct the record. That is not true. Keith said he did not want to come on because he did not want to be the only man with a bunch of women. He lives his life, with the exception of a little person, around a bunch of women, because we have all girls except for a boy. But at any rate, I had to clear that up because you lie on me sometimes. So last month, I decided that because March was Women's History Month, that we were going to celebrate all things melanin magic and all things fabulous. And so we started off the month with my beautiful mother,
Yes.
who joined us. And I thought that was a delightful conversation. And y'all know that sometimes I'm in the Soul Purpose kitchen cooking. I tried to cook and talk to my mom at the same time by myself, and I burned up my waffles, so I didn't do that the next two shows. Then the following week, we were joined by Candace Nunn Johnson and Katie Brinson, two fashion stylists who also happen to be my sorority sisters. Phenomenal conversation. And then last week, we were joined by Sarah Herring, Lanice Germany, Yala Ford, and Desiree Noisette. And the conversation, my next is coming up. The conversation was so good that we had to extend it past the allotted hour that we had on In Touch News, because that conversation just got really, really good.
In other words, y'all were running your mouth.
We were running our mouth, but it was so if you haven't had an opportunity to watch those 4 shows, I would highly recommend them. I'm going to just do a little wardrobe fix right here. Well, but it was really good. It was a really good show. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to do it by myself. You will note that the last show I said that I needed you, because it's hard to do it by myself.
It is hard.
So I needed my partner in crime.
It takes a team, and we are now in the month of April. And what better way to kick off this month than to talk about a subject that is relevant and in the news? For certain. With those recent events, I mean, this subject, we're going to be talking about racism. This subject has taken on really kind of a new significance.
So one of the things that my husband has said since we started the show, one of the reasons that we started doing the show over a year ago, was that we wanted to have conversations about things that are going on in the Black community that we thought were important. And so if you've watched us over the last year, we've talked about everything from mental health, we've talked adoption, we've talked self-care, we've had like a women's only conversation, a men's only conversation, talking about relationships. We've talked about the full gamut. We've also talked about racism, and we had a discussion from a intellectual HR perspective, because both of us are in HR on not different sides, but just in different realms, different spaces, and talked about this concept of anti-racism. And so we've talked about racism and race amongst ourselves, but we're just kind of speech preaching to the choir.
Right.
And while we have separate conversations with our white colleagues, sometimes those who are open to doing it about race, we've never had a multiracial conversation about race on our show. And so my husband said, I want to invite Ola, Mandi, Ryan. I was like, okay. You think they'll want to come on? Do they know what they're getting themselves into when they come on the show? I'm going to ask them. All they can do is say no.
That's right. And I tell you what, as frustrating as it is sometimes to try to explain to white folks how sick and tired we are of having the same, being brought into the same uncomfortable conversations. We also know because from personal experience that there are some white allies and advocates that actually kind of do get it.
Yep.
So as tempting as it is to try to lump all people into one category, we know that that's not.
And so before you continue, and shoot to our guests, because I don't want to spend too much time with us talking, because that's not why they're here. I do want to ask, because I see people are in the chat room, if you all have questions or there's comments that you all, I have my phone, so if there are questions or comments that you all have for our guests, feel free to drop them in the chat room, and I'll try to intermingle them in the midst of our conversation.
All right, so you want to introduce our first guest?
So our first guest is someone who I've known, I don't know how long I've known. She was Mandi Ballard when I first met her, but now she's Mandi. I think that she's married.
2010.
Okay, so it's been over 10 years. So I met Mandi. Mandi and I worked together at a law firm. Mandi's a lawyer. And when I first met her, I just said, she's a really funny white girl. I really like her. And then we just developed a relationship, probably just work related. And then we started hanging out periodically after work. And then the more I talked to Mandi, the more I realized that Mandi is unafraid to speak truth to power. And if you get offended in the midst of her speaking her truth, then that's just on you. And so Mandi is one of those few people, not very many people that, and I've had, we can talk about this later, but I've had this conversation with Mandi that there's room for all of us to grow. And Mandi and I have done panels together, Black girl, white girl, talking about race. That I think was pretty well received. We're doing it again in April. But that I know one of the things I need to work on is to expand my friend circle. And so I have two female white friends. Mandi is one, and people who I consider friends. Mandi is one, Meredith Gauntz is the other. And so Mandi has graciously agreed to join our conversation.
I thought she'd agreed to introduce you to some more white people.
I know more white people. There's a circle of trust. Mandi and Meredith in the circle of trust. Don't judge me. We actually did. So Mandi is also because we have had this conversation about interracial relationships, and Mandi called me because on our podcast, I said, if she not Mandi white girl, then Miles can't date her. Didn't I told you that, Mandi.
I heard it. Yeah. I heard it. I remember. I know. I'm famous.
I have growth. There's room to grow. That's why we're having this conversation.
Mandi, say hello to our viewers and tell them what you do.
Hi. So I'm an attorney and a serial entrepreneur. I'm sort of rebranding myself as a problem solver. So I have a couple of different businesses. But the newest thing I'm doing that I really want everybody to check out is called Drop It. The website is dropit.legal, and it is a dispute resolution for ordinary people. So it is a way to solve legal disputes without having to go through the formalized court system. It is inexpensive, efficient, and gets to the point. So check out Drop It on Facebook and dropit.legal on the website.
And Mandi's a damn good attorney. I'd like to share that.
I seem to recall that.
Yes.
You're very complimentary. Next, I want to bring in a former coworker who we worked together years ago. And I knew he was just a little bit different when I started to interact with him, because over time, I eventually began to realize that this was someone who actually supported me in a lot of my external activities, because I was very active in the community, and it seemed like whenever I kind of needed something, I could always kind of count on Ryan. So let's welcome Ryan Niemeyer. Take yourself off of mute and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Keith. And I was afraid where you were going to go with that when you said you knew I was a little bit different, but you finished well. So I appreciate that. My name is Ryan Niemeyer. I'm the Senior Director of Group Sales for Vinnick Sports Group, which most of you probably know more as the Tampa Bay Lightning. In addition to my everyday responsibilities, I'm also a member of our DEI Council and also a member of our Pride Employee Resource Group. So that's probably the most pertinent to this conversation, but very honored to be part of the conversation. Thank you, Keith and Monica. I look forward to having this discussion today with Mandi and Ola as well.
And an outstanding father and family man too, I might add. So
thank you.
Another reason he's one of my role models as well. So finally, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to our viewers somebody that I have known now for over 20 years. And although we used to work together, we were peers when she first came into the organization, which is a very large Fortune 50 sized organization. It's what she has done since that time that really speaks to what happens when someone is not afraid to give weight to a voice that affects change. That I'm really proud of. So welcome to the show, Ola Snow.
Thank you. So excited to be here and have, I think, a lot of fun and have an uncomfortable conversation. As Keith said, we worked together a long time ago. I am on the executive team of a large organization here in Ohio. I also have been the executive sponsor of our Pride group at our organization, as well as I report to the CEO, so I get an opportunity to have a loud voice at the table. And he and I both co-sponsor our D&I Council, which are 16 individual business leaders that help us lead our D&I efforts forward, as well as our newly formed Black and African American cabinet that gives counsel to the CEO and I around what's really going on in our community and our organization, which has been a lot of uncomfortable but needed conversations. So thanks for inviting me, Monica, Keith.
Thank you for being
Would you
here.
like me to start?
If you would, please.
Great.
Let's jump into it. Let's go.
So again, thank you all for being here. So I'm going to start with you, Mandi. We have had like real conversations about race, and I know that you share with me just some of your upbringing that has kind of shaped and formed your thoughts about race. And I know one of the things that we talked about is you were also in an interracial relationship, and I know that that has also shaped some ways in terms of how you view race. So can you just kind of give our listening audience a little bit of a perspective about kind of your upbringing, kind of how your navigation through life has formed you to be or created you a person that's just going to, you know what, I'm going to be, forget an ally, I'm going to use the F word, forget an ally, forget an advocate, I'm going to be an accomplice in this space.
So thank you. I was born in an extremely white rural area in Western New York. And then in like first grade moved to a more diverse area that had a lot of Asian, a big Asian community. And we had some Black students at our school, but mostly it was white and Asian brown mix of students. And so my whole life from that point on, my best friend has always been a person of color, right? So and so I didn't really, it's not something I really thought about at all until I was in middle school, and I actually introduced my father to the man that is now my husband. We were 12 years old, and when we got home from that, my father said to me, "Why didn't you tell us Corey was Black?" And I like thought that was just the weirdest question. Like, I don't know why I didn't tell you, you know, like, but I had a crush on him. I liked him, so my parents heard me talk about him and I never said anything. And so that was like the first time I really realized that it was a thing. And then as I grew up and I learned more about my mother was very active. My mom was a hippie, so she was very active, and she would have been a Black Panther if she wasn't so damn pale, and wanted to have hair like Shaka Khan. And so my mom has always been very like aware of sort of white privilege and white dominance, and been very careful about it. And so it was sort of like, I guess, an undercurrent that I didn't even notice until my father stepped out of it and made an issue, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that was, that was a hard moment for both my mom and I, because, that was not who we wanted to be.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Mandi. Ryan, we're gonna ask you the same question. I know that you are a man of strong faith, and I know that guides a lot of your decisions as well. But give us some insight on how you evolved into kind of the person that you are now.
Sure. So I was born in Northwest Ohio, again, relatively rural, mostly white, moved to Columbus before 6th grade. And it really wasn't until middle school that I probably had my first understanding, if you will, of other races and other cultures. And so in middle school, I had two really close buddies. One was Black. And again, I thought nothing of it at the time. right? We were just buddies. We both liked to play baseball. We both liked to play football, you name it. But spending a lot of time, right, with his family, he's spending a lot of time with mine, you do start to understand that there are some differences in races, right? Nothing bad, but that just there are differences. So then fast forward to high school. Again, I went to a probably middle to upper class high school, majority white high school. And the group of Black students at our high school, it was my sophomore year, started talking about having a walkout. And to me, as a white student, I didn't completely understand, right? But they were talking just about the way they were treated by teachers, in different rules and expectations. And so that was probably my real awakening when it came to, just being differences, right? In inequities in the system. And so that was probably my first aha moment, if you will. And then when I got down to being able to choose a college to go to, my top two colleges, one was very much like where I went to high school, right? Majority white, upper middle class, student body. And the other had representation, I believe, of 15 different countries, many different races, many different socioeconomic statuses. And so that's where I chose to go because I didn't want the same 4-year high school experience, right? And so I look back at that time in my life and I think that decision is probably one of the best I've made because it opened me to seeing other races, other nationalities, and just other perspectives, right? And so I would say that's probably where I grew the most, right? And we can talk about, later in the show, becoming an advocate and trying to get better. But I would say that's probably my upbringing and where I first started to see that personally. I give all the credit in the world to my parents. My mom, was a social worker for most of my life. My dad was a prosecuting attorney and ultimately a judge. So I've seen probably, both sides of a lot of different situations. They both come from different ends of the political spectrum. But what I give them a ton of credit for is they have both always been advocates. And, so I think it was bred into me, right? First, but then as I started to understand and see things, it became a conscious choice to really try and to understand all perspectives.
Wow, that's
Good.
fabulous. Thanks. And so Ola, you've heard and you've kind of tracked me and Monica's history. You know that I married a Southern girl, and I know that you are also a Southern girl. So tell us about how, because we know that the South is racist, right? So,
I mean,
so tell us about how wonderful it was when you moved up north to determine that that you had escaped racism.
I did. I escaped it, right? I moved north above that Mason-Dixon line. So, I'll sum it up in one quick story, and that is I got married on a Saturday and moved to, at that time, West Virginia, above the Mason-Dixon line though. And I went to an outdoor concert with a kind of a country flair, and I had never seen so many Confederate flags in my entire life than I saw in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I was like, whoa, okay. I mean, it was, full-fledged Confederate flags. And so, I mean, I think we know with what's going on and what we've seen going on in Minnesota, pick your state, racism is everywhere. It does have some different flares, and I would say there's certainly a lot more people who are not educated about the roots of racism. So we have a lot of uncomfortable conversations just saying, did you know? But it's alive and well. I'm at our lake house, which is in rural Ohio, lots of Ohio. And I passed 2 houses with a Confederate flag proudly showing on my way. So I hate to say it, but you are not escaping it. I certainly didn't escape it 20 something years ago when I moved north.
Wow.
So go ahead, Mandi. So go ahead.
I agree with you, and I will tell you that Buffalo. So Corey and I grew up in Buffalo. We've lived in Charlotte, or he's lived in Charlotte. I lived in Georgia. We've lived in Florida, and Buffalo is the most segregated and most racist city that we have ever lived in. It is the place that is most dangerous for him to be.
Wow.
of all the places.
Crazy.
Wow.
So I do have a question though. So I know how the Confederate flag feels for me because my mom grew up in Memphis, my dad grew up in Pensacola, both attended segregated schools and kind of grew up through that time. So the Confederate flag has a negative connotation for me, and I don't care what anybody says. Y'all lost, so I don't know why you're hanging it, but whatever. We can get into that.
I call it the loser flag.
Right. But when you see it, because some people really believe that when they're flying, so if you're on I-4 and you're driving down I-4, when you enter Hillsborough County, either from I-4 or 75, there's a huge Confederate flag flying, and their belief is that that is a sign of Southern heritage. What connotation does it bother you all when you all see the Confederate flag? Kind of what goes through your mind when you see that, particularly now in 2021, knowing all of the Confederate flag means, regardless of what people's connotation means or what they believe it means. What does it mean to you all when you see it? Ryan, I'm gonna start with you.
Yeah, it baffles me, right? Quite honestly. In the allegiance to the Confederate flag and the desire to fly it. I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that wasn't the sole purpose of the Civil War, but daggone, it was a key part of the Civil War, right? And why the Civil War was fought. And just anytime that you are flying something that symbolizes either directly or indirectly the enslavement of people, of humans, I just don't understand it. It makes me sick, quite honestly. I don't know what else to say, right? I mean, pretty straightforward. It baffles me.
Yeah. And Ola, you're from Alabama, and so you know the history of Alabama, particularly in the civil rights movement. It was probably one of the worst. It was worse than Mississippi. Very few people know that. But I was actually very surprised when you say that you saw more Confederate flags in Pennsylvania than you did, or Pittsburgh than you did in Alabama. So when you see it, what is the feeling that you get when you see it?
Well, I think there are two kind of things that come to mind. One is power, because I think a lot of what we're talking about today is really a conversation of who is in power and wanting to keep that power. It's a symbol for me it's hate. We look at it. We look at it as a symbol of hate in our family, in my company. I have to come clean though, right? I grew up in South Carolina. My dad grew up in North Carolina, and my great grandfather fought for the Confederacy, and I had to come to terms with that. Now, we didn't own slaves. We can go back and track that. And I can remember my kids being so oh, Mom, I can't tell my friends that. So I had to come to terms with that. So for honestly, Monica, it baffles me like Ryan. And I actually say to people in the North, this is like fighting, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, they fought for the Union. Like that is literally a Union, a loser flag that only flew for 5 years. I mean, I think if we go back and look at that flag and what it stood for and all of those things. So, those are things that I've had to, come to terms with as, my heritage but I look at it I look at that flag not as my family history, but from a history of power and hate.
Wow.
Same question.
So for me, I mean, it makes me real angry and disgusted and sick to see it. And I have a much more visceral reaction to it than Corey does. And for him, he actually likes knowing who is on what side, right? So he sees the Confederate flag, and of course he doesn't think like, oh good, it's a Confederate flag, but he does think, I know I'm not gonna mess, I'm not gonna mess with those people. I don't want to be around those people. And he knows how those people are gonna perceive him. So, I'm much more visceral about it than he is.
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys, we've all heard the phrases, I'm not racist, right? I have Black friends, and I don't see color. So those are all the things that are kind of point gatherers, right? So you get points for those things. And I know that, in the contemporary times, we know that there's some real confusion as to why that's just not good enough anymore, right? Because Black folk are kind of tired of hearing it.
I'm not racist because I have a Black friend.
Right. Yeah, I'm not racist.
Or I can't hold racist ideologies because
I have Black friends. Because I want. So give our viewers some perspective on what is the difference between hey, I'm just I'm not racist or whatever, and true allies and advocates in this struggle. Ola, let's start with you.
Well, I think we all know it's today you have to be anti-racist, like get in the game. This is about being anti-racist. And look, you're not going to wake up one day and just know everything. See, I call it the journey from awareness to allyship to advocacy, right? Think about it as a mentor to a sponsor, which we all sometimes know the difference. Like, are you willing to put your political capital and even your privilege to work? That's to me around, being anti-racist, and then getting out and doing something about it. Don't do something about it without knowing what you're doing. We don't need that. We don't need a bunch of, what I call uneducated white people that just want to go out and fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I call it can you go out and listen and learn and then act and use that privilege? But I do think it's the difference of driving change, right? Is to be an advocate, to be anti-racist is honestly, what are you going to do about it? And in what situations, which I think we'll talk about, what situations, what does that mean for you, right? What does that mean? What is doing and speaking up going to do? So I think for us and at my organization, we have to understand what are the barriers that are keeping people from literally thriving. And that goes with listening, looking at your data. I mean, literally get in the game so that you can see life through a different lens because it's out there.
So I have a question I'm posing now. I know we have 5 minutes for break, but this question has come up a couple times in the chat room. And Mandi, you touched on it about the first time you were aware or made aware of differences when your dad asked that, well, why didn't you tell me that Corey was Black? And so I know that Ola, we've inboxed you've inboxed me about just kind of some of the things that white folks will say. I'm interested in knowing how you all navigate that, because you all are in spaces, and this may be one of the questions that you have further down, but you all are in spaces and in groups where we're not present. And so I'm going to assume that in those groups and in those spaces, there are people who are saying things that at your core, that if someone else heard them say it, somebody's going to say you were racist, or that's probably not the best thing to say. How do you navigate this space? How do you challenge? I've seen Mandi challenge people publicly, which is why she's there's no question in my mind. If Mandi sees it, she don't care who it is. If somebody says something, Mandi is calling you out and saying, excuse my language, you're a dumbass. And she said it publicly. But how do you navigate that space particularly if it's a family member or a really close friend? How do you navigate that space? Did that question make sense?
It does.
It was a long. My husband fussed at me about a long preface, but
no. I'll give you a couple of things. First of all, let me say this, and I got this from. I have some very close truth tellers that I can go to and ask stupid questions, and I had this. First of all, best advice somebody gave me is don't try to plow a dead field. If it's a dead field, move on. Do not waste your energy. So somebody's, at the Confederate flag at the picnic, I'm probably not going to get on there. And they kind of who they are, but family members, it's really funny. My siblings and I, who all grew up in the South, have a Zoom call, and we got into a conversation about race. And so again, it's about listening and educating and then honestly encouraging people to go out on their own, which I'll talk about, a little bit later too, around it is not Black people's responsibility to educate white people on racism. This is a white problem. It is not a Black problem. And so, but helping people along the way and assuming positive intent, Keith's going to hear about that. He's heard that from somebody we used to work with, always assume positive intent. And I got into a lot of discussions around race, around the election, around other things. And, if someone is willing to listen and then just pique their curiosity and point them in the right direction, without trying to, hey, let me explain to you how slavery is now mass incarceration. Taking people through that in one dinner hour is probably a little too much. But talking about my own journey, right? Being authentic and vulnerable and saying, here's how what I've learned and I've changed.
Yeah.
Helps that too, I think.
So we're gonna go to a break. When we come back, I want to hear same question, and I would love to hear Ryan and then Mandy's response to that. So we're gonna.
And then the other thing, and we're talking about racism today on the Soul Purpose Show, but the other thing we're gonna talk about when we come out on the other side is what I call kryptonite. I call it white supremacy kryptonite, and we're gonna share with our viewing audience what I'm talking about.
Ooh. So we'll be back after our break.
Wherever we go, we about to bring on the positive vibe. Wherever we go, we are gonna do what makes us feel right. I'm just getting off the train.
Welcome to Calvin's Barbershop.
You all got to see this.
I don't even want to know what you're looking at on that phone.
Well, you should. I was learning about the dangers of high blood pressure and that we need to get ours checked regularly. High blood pressure can increase the risk of heart attack or stroke, but this text program can help keep it at a healthy range. Just text Barbershop to 97779 to sign up.
I'll get right on it as soon as I'm done with this baby panda video.
Text Barbershop to 97779. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
It's important to plan ahead for emergencies, like the storm. When it kicked in, we had a plan. We were able to get in touch with each other in no time.
How to find each other.
The whole experience was fine.
the most frightening 10 hours of my life.
If there's one piece of advice I'd offer other moms out there, it's to stay calm and keep to the plan.
Some parents plan ahead, some don't. Make sure you know where to find your family in an emergency. Start your plan at ready.gov. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
It may be hard to believe, but people just like you are already saving money. FeedThePig.org makes it easy. Their simple savings plan teaches you how to start saving without going overboard, so you don't need to start foraging wild berries.
I was skeptical, but these are actually pretty good.
You don't need to sell your soul to the devil.
$15 is the best I can do.
You just need feedthepig.org. Don't get left behind. Get tips and tools at feedthepig.org. Brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Welcome to Calvin's Barbershop.
You all got to see this.
I don't even want to know what you're looking at on that phone.
Well, you should. I was learning about the dangers of high blood pressure and that we need to get ours checked regularly. High blood pressure can increase the risk of heart attack or stroke, but this text program can help keep it at a healthy range. Just text Barbershop to 97779 to sign up.
I'll get right on it as soon as I'm done with this baby panda video.
Text Barbershop to 97779. A message from the American Heart Association and the Ad Council.
When it comes to reality radio, everyone is a star.
I know that's right.
On your smooth soul and R&B station.
On the World Wide Web.
Access granted.
In Touch Radio.
Wherever we go, we about to bring on the positive vibe.
All right.
I love my husband so much. Monica, you're on mute. We have not gone back live. Let the producer produce. You write the script and you engage our guests. Let me do my job.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. You're on the Soul Purpose Show. We're talking about racism. We've been teasing this for weeks. Actually, for a year, we've been telling y'all. Monica and I, we actually know real white people. and I know some of y'all, people probably didn't even realize that we were telling the truth, like, because we've had all black guests. This is a special edition of the Soul Purpose Show. We have three close friends of ours breaking down what happens on the other side. And you were in the middle of asking a question, asking our guests to weigh in because it was in the chat.
Right.
How do you guys navigate the space when you are not, or when people of color are not around and you're in circles where people are not being
particularly in this climate? And Ola kind of touched on it. This has been this last year, and we're going to get into George Floyd and the racial reckoning. But this year, with the election and everything that happened, I know that I've seen on Facebook, where I've seen in other groups that I'm in, where it's predominantly white women, that they're saying that they had to take off, cut off family members or cut off friends just because it was clear. This year was eye-opening for a lot of people in terms of kind of where people stood. So Ryan, same question. How do you navigate that space? Do you challenge a person then, or what do you do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it is difficult. And Ola, I thought it was interesting when you were talking about don't plow a dead field. I may not be as further along or as smart. Maybe I haven't realized it yet. I'm still plowing some probably dead fields as I look at it, or at least trying to. It is difficult, right? And, I think the easiest thing to do, right, and we're hearing about it from all sides right now, is when somebody doesn't agree with you, right, just tune them out, right? Like, I'm going to unfriend them, I'm going to mute them, or whatever it is on social media that you can do. And to me, I think that's probably the worst thing that you can do, right? At least in my mind, because I want to have that conversation, right? And I want to try and find out why somebody believes the way they do. And to Ola's point, let's introduce some ideas and really see if they're willing to learn, right, and willing to grow. And so, I'm not against by any means, and Keith knows this. We're friends on Facebook, and he's weighed in on some of these conversations as well. But I have no problem calling anybody out. And I guess I see it differently. I say calling them out. I try and call people in to the conversation, right? And let's have this conversation and see where it goes. And sometimes we'll agree to disagree. But I think probably the biggest growth that I've had in myself is, I'm not willing to not engage anymore, right? I can't assume that somebody else is going to do it for me, and that just by being not racist, that I'm okay, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing. In one of the best books that I have ever read in my 40 plus years of life is How to Be an Anti-Racist. And that was the first thing that I picked up after the George Floyd murder. And it really made me look at myself and understand that, being not racist isn't the opposite of being racist. It's just being complicit, right? And being silent to a certain extent, and not doing anything, right? And being anti-racist is the opposite of being racist. So I think that's where I stand, but I'm all for having those conversations. It's the only way we're all going to get better. And I'm just not willing to see somebody put something inaccurate or hateful on Facebook or social media and not challenge them in some way, shape, or form.
Awesome.
Hey, Monica, when you have Dr. Kendi on your show, Ryan and I would like to come back.
Listen, he is a rattler, and so I'm putting it out into the universe. He is a rattler. He's younger than us. But, if the podcast gods say Dr. Kenny's going to be on, I will welcome him on the show. We can't pay you, so you have to come for free. But hopefully he does it on the Shield of FAMU. But Mandi, same question.
Mandi, we know you just cuss people out, basically.
Which is fine by me, because I'm right there with her co-signing. Cuss, Mandi. Go ahead.
Well, I won't now because I was warned ahead of time that I shouldn't. So I will behave myself. But so there's like a couple of different aspects here, right? Because like it depends on the context. But I will say, dear white people, if you have ever said I'm not racist because I have a black friend, you got a problem. We need to talk. Like, hit me up. We're gonna have a conversation. What that is tokenism, right? Mm-hmm. That is using your black friend that you are professing like or love for as a token to allow you to say things that you shouldn't be saying.
Oh, that's good.
Right? Like that is what's happening. You know that what you are about to say is going to offend someone of color. And so you are prefacing it with, don't be offended. I'm cool. Black people like me.
Wow.
Right? And so when I was in college, I went to FAU, Florida Atlantic University, which is fairly diverse university. And at one point I met some kids from Lynn University, which is the private school down the road, not at all diverse, right? And I swear I met a guy who showed me a picture of the black guy in his fraternity to prove to me that he was not a racist. Like this was back before our phones had pictures in them. So this guy had a picture in his wallet of his fraternity with the black guy in the middle. I'm not kidding you.
That's actually 12 points.
like
That's 12 points.
and I was just like, I don't like, I didn't even know how to respond to that because it's so stupid. Like it's so bizarre. What, okay. And so I'm tokenism makes me very upset. And I see people that we grew up with that try to tokenize my husband. That is very upsetting to me. And one of my good friends and one of my husband's best friends from growing up, her and I make it our mission to take on people that do that, particularly to Corey, because we love him and we're not going to let that stand. And it has led to some very big fights and some deleted friends and blocked friends on Facebook. I sort of agree with the don't plow the dead field thing. But I do try to have the conversation if I can, right? Like, I try to have the conversation. If somebody says something to me that, is offensive or ignorant or whatever, I say, and what I do is I talk about my experiences, right? I don't talk to them about, this is how white people are, this is how Black people are. I talk to them about, look, I married a Black man. And before I married a Black man, this was what I thought. Since I've been married, it's been different. Even though we dated for 9 years before we got married, things have been different since we've been married. And I have learned all through those, 15 years that we've been together, I've learned a lot, much more in the last 6 since we've been married. And so I tell stories because I feel like you're going to hear if you know me, then you're going to think I'm credible, right? And you're going to know that these stories are accurate and they're not just like, random generalizations, right? But quickly, I know because I'm talking too much, but
it's okay.
We just had, Monica and I just had this conversation where somebody, another lawyer that I work with, said something very not acceptable, and about, sort of about how he's not racist. It was a tokenistic kind of statement. And so I got into the conversation with him. And so I started telling him about my experiences and what I've seen my husband go through and all of that. And he said to me, and so is that supposed to be an excuse? And I was like, an excuse for what? He's like, for not being successful. And I was like, no. My husband is successful. He is very successful. First of all, married the best woman ever in history. Second of all, runs his own business.
Yeah.
He's very successful. None of this was an excuse. And the conversation wasn't even in the context of excuses, but that's where his brain went. And so that was like another sort of insight for me when I'm talking to white people, like, okay, now I know that that's also something that they just randomly think that now I have to address.
Well, what I want to do is and thank you for sharing that, because that's it's really a good segue into why we're talking about conversations that you guys have amongst each other, is talk about current events and talk about some of the recent events. And I'll be remiss if I don't start out talking about the January 6th insurrection, because for me, it was one of those times where I don't mind. We don't mind sharing with the majority community that when the events kicked off, Monica and I were sitting at the house, like sipping tea, like this is y'all problem, like y'all this is y'all's business.
I was posting on Facebook. Like, I popped and it's just, so from a legal I was shocked first.
Oh yeah,
I was shocked.
It was shocking. It
was shocking because I know that if it had been a crowd of Black folks, thousands of Black people with bear mace and sticks and armed, there'd have been a bunch of dead bodies. And that's just the reality of the situation. So when I looked at it, I was like, this is our issue to solve. Y'all got to figure this out. But what was so interesting to me is that nobody, and Black was like, all of us said nothing happened. The fact that they were able to walk away from what happened in the Capitol and not a single arrest was made feeds into what we've continued to say about this concept of white privilege. And I want to, they weren't arrested the day of, is my point. They were arrested later. They were not arrested the day of. There were no arrests the day of.
Okay. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm more interested in I'm more interested in what conversations were you guys having while that was going on?
Because there's this concept of white privilege that was overlaying all of that, right? And we've talked about white privilege, and I know we've had conversations about white privilege. So when y'all saw that, were you all thinking like, oh my, what were you thinking when you saw it? Other than the fact that it was just wrong on every level, what were you thinking when you saw it?
I will, maybe this is the progress that I think white people have made, is I had about 20 colleagues call me and said exactly what you said, Monica. If that was Black Lives Matter, they'd be hauling people off to jail. They'd be beating people. The National Guard would have been there well before they even showed up. So maybe that's a little bit of progress. We were having the same conversations. Now, the people I tend to, those people that call me are kind of like-minded, and we've been on this journey together. So, but we were having the same conversations on, holy smokes, this is crazy, and this is just about oppression and power.
Yeah.
And if that was a Black Lives Matter, those literally people would have been beaten and dragged off to jail.
Absolutely, Ryan.
On in the moment.
Yep, in the moment. It wouldn't have been a delay. Ryan?
No, I agree with what both of you have said. What amazes me, and when you look on Facebook, social media, and those folks that I'm friends with and engage with, how vocally outspoken they were about when, after George Floyd's murder, all of the people, everybody was rioting and looting, right? Everybody was. It wasn't protests with some looters and some rioters. It was everybody is rioting, burning things, you name it. And those same people after January 6th were like, most of them were peaceful, right? Most of them were peaceful. It was just a couple of them that were, beating police officers or storming into the Capitol, right? Most of them were peaceful. And that's the part that just, you can't look at that and then say, white privilege doesn't play a part in that, right? And
Ryan, let me interrupt you, because I had a lot of before January 6th conversations with my white colleagues, and have brought up lots of pictures after World Series, after Penn State, Joe, the statue came down in Paterno, and they rioted and burned couches and broke into businesses. Nobody talks about all that stuff that happens after a good old, Super Bowl win, right? Mostly white people being destructive. But I even hey, what's the difference between this picture and this picture, except the color of people's skin, and that you got a Super Bowl trophy in your city?
For sure.
The other thing that I want to point out is, if you look at, so one of the things after George Floyd, I do want to touch on that. Jump in. So after George Floyd's murder, I'm gonna call it what it is, the protest for Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter folks were peaceful. It was other folks that came in that were not associated with the protest that were destructive. But what they did was those folks that were, kind of on the, he should have complied, or it's Antifa, or whatever that space is, were trying to link what was a peaceful protest. And I would share that primarily the people that I saw that were protesting were white folks. It was white people, and it was a diverse group of folks who were peacefully protesting George Floyd's murder, because I think everybody finally saw, because we had no choice because we were in lockdown, what Black folks and folks like you all have been saying for years, that there is disparate treatment with the way law enforcement treats Black and brown people for the same behaviors. And we were finally able to see it. I know Mandi actually called me, because I think after you and Corey got married, Corey got stopped by the cops. And so she was able to articulate she said, Monica, I now understand how you feel. So I felt every time he leaves the house, I have to say a special prayer over Keith, because I don't know. You don't know if he gets pulled over, kind of how a cop will be feeling that day. And Mandi has a special appreciation for, because she's married to a Black man. So so I know I interrupted the conversation about how you were feeling on January 6th, but man, I want to hear you since Ola and Ryan were able to touch on it.
Okay. Do you want me to?
Whatever you want to talk about.
Okay. So the January 6th thing, I will say I was not surprised at all. I was kind of like what Keith said, you know, sipping my tea, going like, yeah, y'all deserve this. This is what happens. And I'm not surprised. Obviously, I know that, you know, I have white skin, and so I have to take some responsibility and do something about it. But what happened does not surprise me in the least. Their behavior didn't surprise me. The reaction didn't surprise me. I didn't make too much comment about it, except for I think I posted a few things about, you know, if this had been Black or brown people, how different it would have been. But you know, I don't know what the solution is to people like that.
Yeah.
And I know, like, you know, with the George Floyd stuff, I mean, I don't know how anybody got past the Philando Castile video. Like, I mean, that video is the stuff of nightmares.
Yeah.
I still can like see it in my head, you know, like it's fresh from yesterday. And so, I mean, how many deaths have we had that have been publicized since then? And we're still just like every single time, oh, well, now, oh, this one was bad because this one was bad because this one. No, this has been going on. And I mean, it's been going on since, you know, the 1800s, the 1700s, but it's, you know, it's the video that is changing things, is people actually being able to see things. And so I just don't, I mean, like, I don't know how Philando Castile wasn't like the drop dead. Like, this is completely unacceptable and disgusting. And so, but yeah, I mean, you know, you are afraid, and it's frustrating because as a lawyer, to not be able to protect my husband from the justice system in the moment is very scary. And you think about, am I going to make it worse? If I intervene, am I going to make it worse?
Yeah.
If I say something, and, you know, I rewatched the George Floyd video this week, and all of that. And I thought about, you know, when the cop said, this is what drugs do to you or whatever, the point he was trying to make was that you should be afraid of George Floyd, right? Because he's intoxicated and dangerous. And so that's to keep people from trying to help him because they're worried about their own safety. And I am at the point now where I said, you know, I don't have kids, so I have a little bit more freedom to, you know, be inappropriate or even put myself at risk, because I don't have to worry about, you know, raising children. But I mean, I think we are at the point now where if I see something like that, I need to physically put my body in that situation.
Well,
and
listen.
I think anything less is unacceptable. And I think if I walked away from that situation and somebody had died and I hadn't put my body at risk in that situation, I wouldn't be able to live with myself.
Yeah, listen, I want to give.
Can I bring something up about just one more thing? Because I think it helps kind of us as white people kind of understand where we can use our privilege. And I'll try to make this fast. Is I commented that I was the executive sponsor of our Proud, our LGBTQ group, and very well public at my company and in my community that my son is gay, 21 years old, college student. And for the first time in my life, when he was 15, I saw a glimpse, not the same, of what discrimination looked like, right? Because he could lose his job. He couldn't get married at the time. I didn't want him to get married at 15, but could be denied housing, so on and so on, right? But at the end of the day, I talk about that a lot around, and we, you know, we support everything when it comes to LGBTQ rights and as a family. And but my kids could still walk down my street with a hoodie on at night and not get the cops called on him. And that is as hard as it is sometimes. And I do worry about him, right? A Matthew Shepard or that kind of situation. I don't worry about him walking down my suburbia street at night and getting the cops called on him or wearing a black hoodie. Yeah. That's where that's where we can start bringing these conversations together and having those real conversations around the table and making people understand the difference of equality and equity and all of those things, right? Because right now, you know, I know everybody's like, well, all lives matter. Well, of course they do, but your life has always mattered. My life has always mattered differently than the two of you. Yeah. And it's just like your kids. Sometimes some of your kids need more attention than the other and help and the spotlight. And that's what this movement is about, right? It's not about that we all don't count. I count as a woman, my son counts as a gay man, but right now, this is the conversation we have to be having.
Well, I want to give all of you guys an opportunity if we have time, because I know we got about 4 or 5 minutes in to the end of the show. But I did promise our viewers that I was going to share what I consider, I just decided to call this myself, white supremacy kryptonite. There's this thing called the critical race theory. And I'm just going to read by definition what critical race theory is, because I have a feeling going to hear more and more and more about it. But loosely unified by two really kind of common things. One is that white supremacy exists. It's an academic theory that white supremacy actually exists and it maintains its power through the law. Mm-hmm. And secondly, that transforming the relationship between law and racial power, as well as achieving racial emancipation and anti-subordination, are possible. That's what critical race theory actually is. There are governors of states, there are elected officials now. There is the former president who has spoken out and using the by executive order to try to stamp out teaching that I just described.
It's really stamping out truth. And I think a part of, and Ola mentioned at the very beginning, a part of this conversation is when you all who sit at tables where we may not be and utilizing your power and sacrificing, I call it accomplishment, using not only your body, but using your power and your access to power to advocate on behalf of those or speak those truths that are uncomfortable for folks that are there. Critical race theory is saying, not recognizing that this country was founded upon slavery. That's how this country made its money. That's truth, right? That doesn't mean that we're still there, but those are truths. And so I want to ask you all, because Ola, you mentioned it. I'm going to start with Ryan. I know how 2 minutes ago, how you all use your power in your spaces to be advocates, to be accomplices. Ryan.
Great question. And I would say, you know, with our DEI council here, which came in full transparency after George Floyd's murder. Right. And so it was necessary. We'll put it that way. And finally, I think our organization is to the point where we're ready to learn, which is good. But it's having those conversations internally and driving education internally, but being willing to lead conversations. I have many, coworkers who would say, even though they're in leadership positions in their department, I don't feel comfortable and I don't feel qualified having these conversations. And I get it. And I have told them, I don't always feel comfortable either. And I'm certainly probably not the most qualified. But we need to have those conversations. We need to make sure that our employees can come to work and show up and be their whole selves and be comfortable. And we need to learn, we need to get better. And I think Ola mentioned it earlier, we need to educate first ourselves and then start talking about how we can make a difference. We just can't sit on the sidelines anymore. And I think I listened into another panel discussion of some Black professionals in the sports and entertainment industry. And one made a great point, and it's brief. But it said, white people need to understand that we as Black people don't hold them responsible for the system that has been created. It was created before all of you, right? It's not your fault. Your privilege, we don't hold you responsible for. It's not your fault. But now that you understand that the system is the way it is and that you are privileged, if you are not actively being part of the solution, then you are exploiting the system and the privilege that you have, which was just very powerful.
So I know we have an end to our show, but if you all have like 10 more minutes to stay on, we can continue the conversation after we end on the radio. And so you want to say goodbye to our In Touch family?
Well, I do. I want to tell our In Touch family, first of all, how honored we are to be able to have this conversation with this group of people on this platform, because it is important. And there are a lot of Black folk who believe we're just not talking white people no more.
Right.
Like, we're just done. We've had enough. And I'm sure that you guys can understand that. But I want to, just for the benefit of our listeners, thank each and every one of you for joining us. Thanks for tuning in. I know we don't count it robbery that you spend an hour on a Saturday afternoon to hang out with us. But thank you guys so much for being open and sharing.
So you all hold on. If you're watching on Zoom, continue to watch. Bye, In Touch family. We'll see y'all next week.
Work all day. I just want to kick back and relax my feet. You got my attention now.